My name is Claire Whitmore. They thought I was just a personal shopper, the sister with no real career, no real voice. They gave me the seat near the kitchen and called it kindness. What didn't they know I owned the building, the restaurant, and the $3 billion empire behind it all? Sometimes, the best revenge is letting the truth speak for itself. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, drop a comment and hit subscribe, because the quiet ones, we don't stay quiet forever. The clink of silver and laughter echoed through the vaulted ceilings of Maison Aurel, the kind of restaurant where linen napkins were folded with precision and waiters glided instead of walking. The annual Whitmore family gathering was in full swing, with my sister Lauren presiding over the evening like a symphony conductor, each relative seated according to her invisible hierarchy of worth. Success had its own seating chart, apparently, and Lauren had memorized it by heart. "Andrew, darling," she chirped, adjusting the place cards with polished nails. "You'll sit next to Mother, naturally. After all, a senior partner at Langford Securities deserves the spotlight." I hovered just past the archway leading to the dining room, observing the ritual like an outsider watching a play she once auditioned for, but never got the part. Lauren floated past me without pause, like I was part of the furniture. Then, as if spotting a shadow that didn't belong in her lighting plan, she turned. "Oh, Claire," she said, blinking as if I'd materialized out of nowhere. "We're a little tight on space this year." She glanced over my shoulder toward the kitchen. "Would you mind sitting back there, maybe near the staff prep area?" Her smile was all teeth, the kind of smile that says, "I'm pretending this is fine so you will too." Then came the inevitable question, light as air, sharp as a needle. "You're still doing that shopping thing, right? Personal shopping or something." I gave her a nod, offering no correction. That label had become convenient, a soft shield that required no explanation. It kept conversations shallow and curiosity at bay. Let them think I was the girl who carried designer handbags for people who didn't have time to shop. That version of me was easier for them to handle, easier to ignore. I crossed the room, heels silent against the hardwood, and took a seat at a small side table near the service doors. The table was half hidden by a decorative planter and a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres. From here, I could see the main table clearly, gleaming crystal, vintage wine, and siblings basking in achievements that were always louder, always more visible than mine. Lauren raised her glass for a toast, her voice echoing through the space. "To family," she declared, eyes sweeping the room. "To ambition, legacy, and never settling for less." No one looked in my direction. I rested my hands in my lap, smoothing the fabric of my black dress. A piece no one would recognize, because it hadn't debuted yet. The designer, as it happened, worked for a label I owned. But that detail didn't belong here. Not yet. The kitchen doors swung open, and a flurry of servers emerged, carrying platters to the glittering table where I didn't exist. I watched them work, their efficiency quiet and deliberate. They didn't know the woman tucked away behind the ivy was the reason Maison Aurel existed at all. Its founder, its financier, its hidden heartbeat. But Lauren didn't see that. Lauren never had. Tonight, I wasn't here to correct her. Not yet. Let her rearrange the seating chart. She didn't realize she was placing herself in the corner of a game I'd already mastered. From my seat in the shadows, the scent of truffle oil and aged wine drifted toward me, luxuries my family adored, so long as they were served by someone else. The irony was rich. I had approved the very menu they now praised. Months ago, in a boardroom overlooking the Seine, the white asparagus with saffron beurre blanc, the duck confit sourced from our private farms, even the hand-folded napkins, all of it had passed through my hands, one way or another. But to them, I was Claire, the one who picked out shoes for clients in boutiques, who did something with shopping, but never anything they deemed worthy of respect. That version of me was easier to stomach, less threatening, more forgettable. Let them forget. Behind the curtain of that lie was Whitmore Lux Holdings, my empire, a global luxury hospitality group operating across 26 countries, managing over 80 properties, from the Amalfi Coast to Kyoto. We weren't just hotels, we were destinations, icons, the kind of places magazines begged to feature and royalty quietly frequented. A portfolio valued just north of 12 billion last we checked, and I built it, quietly, intentionally. The personal shopper title had been born out of necessity. Years ago, when the company was still a seedling and I was working from borrowed office space, I'd needed something simple to tell my family, something vague enough that they wouldn't ask questions, but polished enough to avoid pity. I told them I helped clients find pieces that suited their lifestyle. No one asked what kind of clients. No one asked why I was in Singapore last fall, or why I'd flown to Buenos Aires for a trunk show that happened to coincide with our final bid for the Las Risas Hotel. That was the thing about the Whitmores, they rarely looked past their own reflections. To them, success was a tailored suit, a business card with a Wall Street address, a name they could drop at fundraisers. What I was building didn't fit inside their cocktail party conversations. Not yet. So I kept it quiet, let them think what they wanted, while I acquired property after property, always one step ahead of the headlines. I remember the first acquisition, the Bellamy in Charleston, a failing boutique hotel, beautiful bones, terrible books. I used every dime of my savings and a quiet partnership with a former professor to buy it outright. I lived in one of the staff rooms for 6 months, helping repaint the walls by day and manage guest complaints by night. I'd answer emails to investors under candlelight when the power cut out. I negotiated linen contracts while scrubbing the front steps myself. I learned every inch of that place. I made it profitable within 9 months. Then I bought its competitor. Then another. While Lauren hosted charity luncheons and Andrew chased IPOs, I studied supply chains and reshaped service models. While they posed for photos in luxury hotels, I was restructuring the ownership of those very chains. The Whitmores celebrated visible power, titles, applause. But I'd learned a different kind of power, the kind you don't have to announce. The kind that lets you walk into a building knowing you own it, even if no one else does. My phone buzzed beneath the table, the vibration barely noticeable against the linen. A message from Julia, my CFO. Rivera Resorts acquisition finalized. Congratulations, Claire. You now own every major waterfront property in Monte Carlo, Santorini, and Cape Town. I read the words, then locked the screen. Outside, the laughter from the main table rose again. Lauren was describing her latest trip to Greece. Something about rooftop cocktails and a private chef who really understood her palate. I smiled to myself. The villa she rented had been one of ours. The chef trained through our culinary program. The rooftop view, renovated last year under my direction. 2 worlds, one scene, one built in silence. And for now, I was content to let her believe they were separate. Claire, my mother called across the room, her voice slicing through the clatter of forks and the hum of conversation. At least come say hello to everyone. We hardly see you these days, with your little business keeping you so busy. Little business. I rose from the side table, smoothing the folds of my dress with deliberate calm. I crossed the floor with the quiet ease of someone who had walked through lobbies far grander than this. Still, I offered a polite smile as I approached the main table, where I was neither expected nor fully welcome. Andrew looked up from his phone just long enough to register my presence. His tailored navy suit was sharp, his Rolex exactly where it needed to be, visible under the cuff but not too obvious. That was Andrew's style. Impressive, but always just understated enough to seem humble. It wasn't humility, of course. It was branding. Still doing that shopping gig, he asked, lips barely curving into what passed for a smile. You know, there's an entry-level role opening in our department. Might be a good foot in the door. I met his gaze, expression neutral. His tone was casual, helpful even, if you didn't know better. But I did. I knew the Whitmore brand of charity well, the kind that cloaked condescension in kindness. An internship, at his bank, for his little sister, who never quite lived up. Appreciate the thought, I said simply, but I'm not currently job hunting. He shrugged, already back on his screen. Just saying, you're good with people, fashion stuff. Some of our private clients love that boutique flair. Boutique flair. My company owned boutique hotels in Milan, vineyards in Bordeaux, and 10 floors of a skyscraper in Seoul. His bank, ironically, had submitted a financing proposal for my latest acquisition, Leclerc Resorts, the one I'd just closed that afternoon. I'd declined their offer. Too aggressive, too self-serving, too Andrew. Julia had sent me the full breakdown. The bank's team had scrambled to position themselves as visionary partners, citing their track record and global presence. But I'd built my empire without needing their name on any dotted line, and I wasn't about to start now. Still, I didn't say any of that. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch, just long enough for Andrew to look up again. Maybe he sensed something. Maybe he didn't. Lauren filled the gap quickly, chiming in with a theatrical tilt of her head. Andrew's been mentoring new hires lately. You should really take him up on it. Claire, so many doors could open. She said it sweetly, like someone offering a half-eaten scone and calling it a gift. I offered my own smile, just as sweet, just as hollow. That's very generous, I said, but I'm managing just fine. I took a sip of water, then placed the glass back with quiet precision. Andrew turned to Mother. Honestly, it's kind of impressive she's kept that gig going this long. What's it been? 6, 7 years? 12, I said. He blinked. 12 years since I started. I repeated. Time really flies. He nodded slowly, but his expression shifted. Something unsettled flickered there, because for a moment, just a moment, he realized the numbers didn't quite add up. A boutique personal shopping gig doesn't survive 12 years without expansion, without structure, without capital. But before the thought could fully land, Lauren tapped her knife against her glass, drawing attention back to herself, to resilience. She toasted, and to family members finding their paths, whatever they may be. The table raised their glasses, and I raised mine too. My smile is steady. My silence is deliberate. Let them toast to paths. Let them offer internships and backhanded praise. They didn't know the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow would announce Whitmore Lux Holdings as the new global leader in luxury hospitality. They didn't know their bank had just been outbid. They didn't know that I wasn't chasing opportunities, I was creating them. And some doors, they don't open for people like me, because I built the whole building. The clatter of plates and quiet hum of conversation returned, almost masking the undercurrent that Andrew's career advice had stirred. I eased back into my seat, letting the moment settle. 12 years, I'd said, and in that space between syllables, I had planted a seed of doubt. But it wasn't time to water it. Yet. The restaurant doors opened again, and Matteo Russo stepped inside with the confident stride of someone used to running Michelin-starred chaos. The owner of Maison Aurel, Matteo, had built a reputation on precision, discretion, and excellence. He was also new to this location, transferred from our Florence property only a few weeks ago. We'd spoken briefly when he arrived, and I had emphasized one simple rule. When my family was present, my identity stayed quiet. Which is why, the moment his eyes found mine, I saw it, the instant recognition, followed by sheer panic. Madame Whitmore, Matteo said, his voice just loud enough to slice through the wine-soaked buzz of the main table. Every fork froze mid-air. Glasses halted just short of lips. And then came the silence. The sharp, ringing kind that always follows a mistake too big to be ignored. Matteo blinked, visibly flustered. Pardon me. I mean, Madame, I... His Italian accent stumbled over the correction as he looked between me and the table full of suddenly alert Whitmores. Lauren's head snapped around, her eyes narrowing. You know Claire, she asked, tone syrupy but with an edge, the kind she reserved for people who dared to break the illusion she worked so hard to curate. Matteo hesitated, caught in the spotlight. I could have saved him then. I could have laughed it off, told them he mistook me for someone else, or deflected with a joke. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted to see what version of reality Lauren would invent. She didn't disappoint. Oh, of course, she said smoothly, already composing a story to protect her worldview. Claire helps coordinate high-end purchases for some of Matteo's elite guests. Right, Claire. I'm sure that's what he meant. She turned to him with a smile like a blade. Matteo glanced at me, his face pale. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then nodded slowly. Yes. Yes. That must be it. But his eyes betrayed him. So did the staff. Around the room. I noticed it. The way servers who had moved like clockwork were now glancing in my direction. Some with recognition. Others with the wide-eyed look of people realizing the woman near the kitchen wasn't just another guest. One waiter quietly redirected his path, stepping around me with more formality than before. And Matteo couldn't stop fiddling with the edge of his order pad, as though trying to erase the name he had already spoken aloud. Lauren didn't see any of it. She had returned to her glass of wine, smug in the assumption that she'd rescued her narrative, that her sister, who sat near the service station, still belonged there. You know, she said, leaning in conspiratorially. If you're ever looking for new clients, I could introduce you to some women from my gala committee. They're always asking about personal shoppers. I offered her a small smile. I'll keep that in mind. But what I kept instead was Matteo's expression. Apologetic, alarmed, and a little awed. He knew who I was, knew exactly what I owned, and he knew, now, that this wasn't just a dinner, this was a performance, one I'd been playing for years. Only now, the curtain had started to shift. Before the ripple Matteo caused could fully fade, the doors to Maison Aurel opened again. This time, the entrance was quieter, no announcements, no missteps. Just the steady stride of Daniel Tron, my chief operating officer, weaving his way through the restaurant like a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once. He wore a charcoal suit and the focused expression he reserved for crisis meetings and final negotiations. In his hands was a leather case, and under one arm, a sleek tablet. The moment I saw him, I knew. He hadn't gotten the memo about discretion tonight. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time. He spotted me, paused briefly, and changed course. As he neared the table, the chatter began to slow again, like a tide pulling back before it crashes. Boss, Daniel said, calm and low-voiced. Apologies for the interruption, but we need your signature before the Asian markets open. Leclerc Resorts paperwork. Final version. Time zones caught up with us. He slid the tablet onto the white linen tablecloth. The signature page was already highlighted. Time paused. Mother blinked. Andrew sat motionless, fingers still curled around his wine glass. Lauren's mouth opened slightly, just enough to register that she had stopped breathing. Boss. Daniel had said it like it was second nature, like it was public knowledge. I picked up the stylus, my movements unhurried, almost graceful. The words on the screen glowed softly, Leclerc Resorts acquisition, $302 billion. Final authorization. Claire Whitmore, CEO. Whitmore Lux Holdings. I signed. The flourish of my name glided across the screen, sealing the deal that had taken 14 months of negotiations, 5 countries, and 2 rejected banking partners, including the one Andrew worked for. Thank you, Daniel, I said, handing the tablet back. 38 properties, he added quietly. More for me than for anyone else. Singapore was included in the final cut. I nodded once. Good. And that was the moment the silence collapsed under its own weight. Leclerc Resorts? Andrew asked, his voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. You. That was you. His eyes darted between me and the screen, doing calculations in real time. The same luxury chain he'd bragged about to clients. The same group his firm had been desperate to represent in financing. And now, mine. Mother's hand gripped the edge of her napkin like it might keep her grounded. Lauren looked stricken, her wine glass suspended midair. That's the Leclerc, she asked, like saying it out loud might somehow reverse the truth. I just stayed at their property in Mykonos. I know the concierge there personally. He upgraded us to the rooftop suite. I offered her a soft smile. That was me. The upgrades. The suite. The personal note on your pillow, I wrote it. Your gala committee was staying on a friends and family rate. Only no one told you the friend was your sister. Matteo, who had been lingering near the service station, looked ready to evaporate. His mistake hadn't just unraveled the evening. It had exposed the scaffolding of assumptions that held my family's view of me in place. Daniel, to his credit, stayed silent. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He knew this moment wasn't for him. Andrew leaned back in his chair, stunned. Wait. Claire Whitmore is the CEO of Whitmore Lux. I tilted my head slightly, letting him answer his own question. His bank had held 3 meetings in the last quarter trying to pitch us a financing package. I'd sat behind mirrored glass, reviewing every term sheet, every condescending footnote. I had declined them all, not because they weren't competitive, but because I knew who'd be reading the rejection. Yes, I said finally. I am. The last syllable echoed like the drop of a gavel. And this time, no one filled the silence. The silence that followed my confirmation wasn't awkward. It was seismic, like the air itself had shifted. My name, so often spoken as an afterthought in family conversations, now hung in the air with weight, with power. Claire Whitmore, CEO. For once, no one had anything clever to say. Matteo had vanished into the kitchen. Daniel remained standing, tablet tucked beneath one arm, still as stone, across the table. Lauren blinked, as if trying to force the evening back into shape. Andrew had gone ghost pale, processing the cascade of implications: the deal, the title, the rejection, and my mother, Evelyn Whitmore, queen of social appearances, sat perfectly still, one manicured hand still resting on her wine stem, her pearls shifting against her throat. I exhaled slowly. Then I let the next truth fall. And while we're being transparent, I said, my voice calm, Maison Aurel is part of our portfolio, has been for the last 6 years. Lauren turned toward me sharply. This restaurant, I nodded. This one, and the 3 others in Chicago. We finalized the expansion plans last spring under Montclair Properties. Andrew frowned. Wait. Montclair? I thought that was a separate group. It was. We acquired controlling interest 2 years ago. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the room. The exposed beams, the curated art, the polished lighting, the details she'd once praised as flawless. The ambiance she claimed matched her taste. I watched it hit her. She hadn't just been hosting events in my restaurants. She'd been showing off my design choices, toasting in my wine cellars, holding court in rooms I had signed off on down to the hand-stitched menus. And she'd never noticed. I turned my attention to my mother. The Montclair Plaza. The building you've lunched in every Thursday for the past decade. I purchased it last quarter. It's undergoing quiet renovations next month. Her lips parted in shock. But I know the owner personally. You knew the previous owner, I corrected gently. I'm the current one, as of about 40 minutes ago, when I signed the last of the Leclerc documents. Her eyes flicked toward the tablet Daniel still held, as if it might confirm the timeline, as if she needed proof her world had shifted, and not just her perception of it. And the apartment complex I live in, I added, along with most of the block, also under Whitmore Lux Holdings, that Civic you love to tease me about. It's my decoy. The town car usually waits one street over. Less attention that way. Andrew finally spoke. You're telling me, all this time, all these years, you've owned the places we've been staying, eating, meeting. Yes. I said it without bitterness. Just clarity. I didn't see the point in explaining. You weren't really listening. Lauren gave a weak laugh, sharp and defensive. But you've always said you were too busy to attend family functions, too overwhelmed. I said simply, in Dubai, or Florence, or Tokyo. Overseeing operations, approving renovations, launching new programs. Mother's brow furrowed. But when we celebrated Andrew's promotion last year, you weren't even at the dinner. I was, I said, just not at your table. I was across the room, finalizing a deal with investors at the bar. The private one, in the back, also mine. Lauren stared at me like I was speaking a different language. And maybe, to them, I was. Because in their world, success had a sound. Loud, boastful, dressed in status and spoken in headlines. But mine had been quiet, intentional, brick by brick. Until now, a shift had taken root, not just in their expressions, but in the space itself. The weight of the room had moved. It no longer centered around Lauren's voice, or Andrew's resume, or my mother's carefully calculated remarks. The attention, the gravity, now rested somewhere else entirely, somewhere they never thought to look. At the woman they once placed near the kitchen. I rested my hands on the table and turned toward the staff area. Matteo had re-emerged, trying to blend in with the servers, but his nervous glances betrayed him. I gave him a single nod. I believe, I said softly but clearly. There's been a mistake with the seating arrangements. Matteo straightened. Of course. Madam Whitmore. Your usual table? I smiled. Yes. The one in the north alcove. We use it for board meetings. It has better acoustics. The words didn't fall flat. They landed like a change in weather. Lauren looked up, lips parting, her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Wait. What table? Matteo gestured toward the alcove, tucked elegantly behind a velvet partition. From where they sat, it looked like a private dining room, dimly lit, surrounded by glass and rich oak. A space meant for decision-makers, not dinner guests. My space. It's always been yours, Andrew asked, disbelieving. For the last 6 years, I replied, It's where we finalized acquisitions, reviewed quarterly growth strategies, hosted silent investors. I prefer to be close to the floor. Keeps me connected to the guest experience. I stood. The staff moved instantly, clearing my setting with quiet reverence. Not rushed, not performative, just precise, like they knew exactly who I was. Because they did. Daniel stepped forward without a word and took his place beside me, as he had in dozens of meetings across cities and continents. His presence at my right was not just instinct, it was protocol. And that was when it happened. The reversal. Lauren rose too quickly, Unsure whether to follow or protest, Andrew followed, more stunned than defiant. My mother stood last, slow and stiff, as if her chair itself no longer recognized her. We walked across the restaurant in silence, not hurried, not dramatic, just undeniable, a migration of power. When we reached the alcove, Matteo pulled back the curtain and stepped aside. The table had already been reset, polished glassware, dark leather menus, and a vintage Bordeaux waiting in the decanter. Your usual. Madame, he said, bowing slightly. I took my seat at the head of the table, the one positioned to overlook the room. Daniel sat beside me. The others hesitated before following. Lauren chose the seat furthest from me, her confidence crumbling under the weight of what she now understood. Andrew didn't speak. Evelyn sat as if someone had just changed the language of her world without warning. I turned to Matteo. The 82 Bordeaux, please, and let the chef know I'd like tonight's special tasting menu, the one we've been refining for the last quarter. He nodded. The experimental fusion course. Exactly. It's time my family experienced what their personal shopper has been working on. And just like that, the table shifted again. Not in place, but in purpose. Because this wasn't just dinner anymore. It was recognition, long overdue. And I wasn't seated in the shadows. I was at the center, where I'd always belonged. The wine was poured with ceremonial grace, the kind reserved for royalty or titans of industry. My family, for the first time that evening, remained quiet, not out of politeness, but bewilderment. The air had shifted, not just socially, structurally. The foundation they'd built their assumptions on was now cracked in every direction. Lauren swirled her glass slowly, eyes darting to the Bordeaux label before quickly looking away. She hadn't spoken in 5 minutes. For Lauren, that was a record. The chef arrived with the first course, an artful composition of seared scallops and compressed watermelon, resting on a chilled lemongrass emulsion. He placed the plate before me with a quiet nod. I remember the last time we all had dinner together, I said softly, letting my gaze drift toward Lauren. Christmas 2 years ago. You made a comment about the cookies I brought. She blinked. The store-bought ones, I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Yes. You said they were surprisingly decent for something off a supermarket shelf. I didn't mean... She started, but I raised a hand gently. No offense taken. They were, technically, store-bought. From a gourmet test kitchen we acquired just 3 months prior. That particular cookie line was in its soft launch phase, part of a pilot program through Marlow Market. Andrew leaned in. Wait. Marlow. The entire chain. I took a sip of wine. Bought it under a subsidiary last spring. We're repositioning it as a premium organic retailer in urban markets, Daniel added. And the cookie recipe acquired for 8 figures. Research and development took nearly 6 months. Our food science team perfected the texture with sea salt harvested from a sustainable cove in Sardinia. Lauren looked as if she might choke on her scallop. You brought test market cookies to family Christmas. They were excellent, I said with a shrug, and easier than explaining where I'd been flying in from. Mother cleared her throat. You always said you had last-minute meetings, that you couldn't take time off like Andrew and Lauren. I couldn't, I said gently. Not because I lacked freedom, because I had responsibilities. Leclerc was in acquisition talks, Tokyo was restructuring, and the Florence property had just finalized its renovation permits. Walking away for a holiday gathering wasn't an option. Not then. She looked down at her plate, fingers slowly twisting the stem of her wine glass. And the Civic, Andrew said suddenly, like he'd stumbled onto a glitch in the Matrix. You still drive that beat-up Honda Civic? I chuckled. It's not beat up. It's well maintained. And it's useful for staying invisible when I want to be. So the Tesla out front. Mine, I confirmed. David, my driver, waits a block away during family events. I find people treat you differently when they think you're the assistant. Mother inhaled slowly. You chose to appear ordinary. I chose peace. I replied. I chose to protect something I was building before it was ready to stand up to scrutiny, before it could survive the weight of expectations or condescension. Lauren opened her mouth, closed it again. Every remark they'd made, every small dismissal, every time they'd waved off my absence or mocked my car or questioned my cookies, none of it had been accidental. It had been permission to diminish, to forget. But every detail I let them misinterpret had been placed with care. A civic, a paper bag of cookies, a soft smile and a vague answer. Not because I lacked the truth, but because they lacked the willingness to hear it. And now, for the first time, they were listening. The second course arrived in silence. Caramelized lamb on a bed of smoked farro, accented with a rosemary reduction. It was a dish born from 3 months of collaboration between our Florence and Montreal chefs. I'd signed off on the plating myself, but no one at the table seemed to notice the food. They were too busy rethinking every word they'd ever said to me. Lauren picked at her plate. Quiet now, the sharp edges of her voice dulled. Andrew still held his wine, but he hadn't taken a sip since the cookies. My mother's fingers toyed with her napkin, folding, unfolding, folding again. The silence invited something else now. Reckoning. So I leaned in gently. Andrew, I said, my tone warm, steady. That entry-level role you mentioned earlier, the one you offered me in your department? He looked up, blinking like he'd just been pulled out of a dream. Yeah, I didn't mean… well, I didn't know. It's fine, I interrupted, letting him off the hook. I understand why you offered, but I think you should know something. He nodded slowly, almost bracing himself. Your bank submitted a proposal last quarter to finance the Leclerc acquisition. Julia walked me through your terms. They were aggressive, over-leveraged, not in alignment with our strategy. His mouth parted, but no words came out. I declined your offer, I added softly. Professionally, respectfully, just like I'm declining the internship. There was no smugness in my voice, no need for vengeance, just a simple exchange of truth. Your team didn't know I was the buyer. I continued. They pitched hard, used your name a few times, said the firm had the best analysts in the city. His jaw clenched, not out of anger, but realization. Then I turned to my mother. Mom, I said, gently, about your Thursday lunches at Montclair Plaza. You might want to cancel tomorrow's reservation. Her brows drew together. Why we're closing it for renovations, I said, folding my napkin. Now that we've acquired it. She blinked, confusion blooming into something softer. You own Montclair? I nodded. Through the real estate arm. Finalized the paperwork about an hour ago. We're redesigning the interior layout and modernizing the wine bar. She said nothing, just pressed her lips together like she was remembering every time she'd bragged about knowing the Montclair management personally. I didn't know you were expanding into retail, she said finally, almost to herself. I've been expanding into a lot of things, I replied. Retail, real estate, private aviation, quietly, mostly. Then I looked around the table. I never kept these things from you because I was ashamed. I said, I kept them because… No one ever asked. They didn't flinch, not outwardly. But the message landed. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't grandstanding. It was the unveiling of truth they'd never thought to look for. Not because I'd hidden it, but because they'd assumed there was nothing to see. Dessert menus had been discreetly delivered, but no one at the table even glanced at them. The weight of truth still lingered in the air. Elegant, quiet, undeniable. I could feel it settling over my mother's posture, softening the line of her jaw. Andrew hadn't touched his lamb. Lauren sat almost too still, her eyes fixed somewhere between her wine glass and the candlelight. Her face held a different kind of tension now. Less superiority, more something else. Maybe recognition. Or regret. I took a sip of wine and folded my hands loosely in my lap. There was one more truth they needed to hear. Not because it would impress them, but because it would reframe everything they thought they knew about me. Lauren, I said gently, watching her look up slowly, remember the Children's Hospital Foundation gala you organized last fall? She nodded. Of course, we raised over $3 million for the pediatric oncology wing. Though the major sponsor fell through, we had to cut half the expansion plan. I smiled softly. That sponsor didn't fall through. They just chose not to be named. Her brows pulled together. What? The anonymous donor. I continued. Was me. Silence. Then a sharp inhale from my mother. Lauren blinked twice. You? I nodded. The full donation was wired 2 days before the gala. Under a shell foundation I control. I preferred to keep it private. Her voice dropped. But that was over 200 million. 215. Daniel interjected gently, still seated at my right. Claire requested the endowment support not just construction, but staff salaries, clinical trials, and long-term patient support programs. Lauren stared at me, stunned, her words caught in her throat. You've been trying to get that wing funded for 3 years. I said, still soft. I knew what it meant to you. I just didn't want the donation to become about me. Or worse, about you having to thank me in public. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And for once, she didn't reach for a rebuttal. My mother leaned in. Claire, that wing saved a dozen lives before it even officially opened. I know. I said. I read the case reports. Andrew whispered. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because real giving doesn't need applause. I replied. It just needs to matter. I let that settle. Then added. Sometimes people need things more than they need to know who gave them. Lauren's voice finally returned, raw and unsure. I spent months knocking on doors, hosting tastings, emailing corporations, and you just... No, I said gently. Not just... I listened. I saw how much it meant to you, and I acted. She looked away, but not in shame, in something closer to awe. This wasn't about outshining her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about doing what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. Especially then, because the most valuable things I'd built didn't have my name on them. They had my fingerprints, my care, my conviction. And sometimes, that's what legacy truly is. The final course had been cleared, but no one noticed. The wine remained untouched. The candle flickered low. It wasn't the food or the luxury or the venue that left them speechless. It was the realization that every assumption they'd built about me had quietly unraveled. And I hadn't raised my voice once. I checked my watch. Midnight was near. In Tokyo, it was already morning. The Leclerc press release would be live within minutes. Our communications team had timed it to coincide with the opening bell of the Nikkei. Headlines would roll out within the hour. Financial analysts would dissect the merger, and Whitmore Lux Holdings would trend globally. But that wasn't the moment I was waiting for. I stood quietly, gathering my clutch and slipping my phone into the side pocket. I have to head out, I said softly, interrupting the stillness. My team in Tokyo is expecting me for the global announcement. We're unveiling the new Leclerc integration strategy. Lauren didn't speak. Neither did Andrew. My mother, after a long pause, rose to her feet. Claire, she said, gently, will you be traveling alone? I smiled, as always. But I have a team meeting me at Haneda. We're rolling out expansion plans in Kyoto next week. Daniel stood as well, collecting the tablet. The driver's already pulled around. Press is outside. I nodded, then turned to Matteo, who had been lingering near the edge of the alcove, hands folded, uncertain whether to approach. Matteo, thank you. Everything was perfect, as always. He bowed. It was an honor. Madam Whitmore. I took one last look at the table, my family seated in the glow of a truth they never saw coming. Not as punishment, not as spectacle, but as quiet correction, a rebalancing. And then I walked toward the front entrance, through the paneled glass. I saw the sleek black Tesla glide into view, headlights brushing the sidewalk in silence. David stepped out, suited, composed, and opened the door as if it were routine. Because for us, it was beyond him. Several photographers had gathered. I could already see the glow of screens. The first wave of headlines must have broken. Leclerc acquired in $3 billion deal. Mystery. CEO revealed. Whitmore Lux Holdings reshapes global hospitality landscape. Who is Claire Whitmore? But those questions weren't mine to answer anymore. I turned back, just for a moment. My mother was still standing, hands at her sides. Lauren remained seated, fingers curled lightly around a napkin that no longer served its purpose. Andrew looked down, then up, then nowhere at all. I'll have David take you all home, I said gently. There's a second car on standby. Lauren looked confused. Wait, your driver? Of course, I said. Family first. I stepped outside. Cameras clicked. Muffled voices called my name, but they faded behind the glass. What mattered most had already happened, long before the headlines, long before the flashing lights. Because tonight wasn't about a merger, it wasn't about global reach or real estate or a portfolio too large to summarize. It was about something far rarer. The truth, finally heard. And the woman they once overlooked, finally seen. I paused at the threshold, the door still held open by David, the night humming softly beyond the halo of lights. Inside, the table remained untouched, half-full glasses, linen napkins folded and forgotten, silverware resting like punctuation marks at the end of an unfinished chapter. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, matte black card. I set it on the table, just beside my mother's untouched dessert. This one's on me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Though honestly, it always was. No one moved. They didn't need to. I turned to Andrew first, catching his gaze across the table. We're expanding our executive team after the Leclerc integration, I said gently. Your bank's analysis was impressive, even if the terms weren't. If you're ever open to working somewhere that reports to me, have your people call my people. His mouth opened slightly, part surprise, part pride, part something he hadn't felt toward me in years' respect. Then I looked at Lauren. She sat straighter as I spoke, though her hands remained in her lap. And Lauren, if you still want that rooftop venue for your engagement party, Maison Aurel might not be available during renovations. But our Paris property has a beautiful glass solarium and a view of the Seine that photographs better anyway. I'll have the events team reach out. Family rate, of course. Her eyes shimmered. Not with tears, but the dawning weight of perspective. I let the silence return for a moment, soft and unforced. Then I offered the last truth. You know, sometimes the simplest things hold the most value, I said. A handwritten note, a quiet gesture, even a batch of cookies no one thinks to question. I looked around the table one last time. That's what this family never quite understood, I added, gently. Success isn't volume, it's impact. And kindness doesn't have to be loud to be real. I nodded once to Daniel, who followed me out without a word. As the door closed behind me, I didn't feel triumph, I felt completion. Tomorrow, the world would dissect the numbers, the strategy, the acquisition. But tonight, what I'd built didn't need headlines to matter. Because true success wasn't walking into Maison Aurel as the CEO they never expected, it was walking out as the woman I'd always been. And this time, they saw her.